David is a disgusting piece of shit. It's as simple as that, really. Now, if you haven't been following the podcast, I have talked heavily on the whole David and Celeste Rivas case. And this is now, I think, my third episode on this whole matter. But recently, we have had the preliminary hearing for David's case. Now, if you don't know what a preliminary hearing is, it's basically just both the defense and the prosecutors presenting evidence to the judge. Then the judge decides whether or not there is sufficient evidence for David to go to trial. Now, this happened over a course of around 4 or 5 days, and we have learned a lot of shocking new details in relation to this case. A lot of stuff which was previously rumored, stuff that was never even thought of, has now come to fruition in this case. And it has made this case so much more disgusting than it needs to be. Hello, my name is Riley. You're listening to The Riley Show, talk about stuff that I'm interested in. And today, we will be talking about the David Anthony Burke court case. Now, a bit of a warning before I go deep into this. I will be talking about some very, very graphic details. There is lots of talk of SA, grape, all of that sort of stuff. I delve into some very, very graphic content in this episode. So please, if any of that triggers you, feel free to click off. I will see you in the next episode. And yeah, let's get this over and done with. So I do want to start off with by saying this episode was meant to be completely different. This episode was meant to be me heading back into my old format where I review the albums and just give off some news. But I feel that I need to come on here and explain to everyone what has happened, because there is a lot that has happened and went down in the courts. And I would just like to preface, he is going to court, yes. The judge decided that there is sufficient evidence for David Anthony Burke to be going to trial. So we will be seeing a lot more stuff come out of this trial. Now, I would love to thank Mads. She is kind enough to have put together all of this information on the d4vd backstage server. If you don't know what that is, it's basically just the server where me and a couple other people update the old David community on the court. She has been completely obsessed with this case. Not obsessed. She has gotten all of the relevant information over the past couple of days and has worked her ass off for this. So shout out to Mads for all of this information. You to go, man. Now, the start of day one on this case was off to a little bit of a rocky start. We weren't expecting to actually see David in the courtroom, because this was obviously a preliminary hearing. But we did actually see David every day throughout this trial. Every day he was in an orange typical prison jumpsuit. He was uncuffed, but he was shackled to the chair. He was giving off a lot of mixed signs, which I am going to talk a lot about further down the track. Now, the court proceeding started off originally with the prosecutors of the case showing the police body cam footage of David telling police that he had, quote, only met Celeste once and that she claimed that she was 18. Now, this was back in February 2024. I would also just like to preface that Celeste allegedly died in April of that year, just before his debut album, Withered, dropped. Prosecutors then ended up showing photos of Celeste's body when it was found in the trunk. And you can imagine, absolutely traumatic. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those photos looked like. Now, in terms of David on this first case, David was, quote, appearing calm in court, and reporters had trouble looking at these photos, but he, quote, kept his eyes glued to the screen the entire time. And it's also said that when the police went to his home back in February 2024, looking for Celeste, they found several Hello Kitty items that appeared to be her belongings. David then showed them a yearbook photo where she at the time looked to be around 11 years old. And this is obviously when he said that he thought that she was 18. Now I'm about to go over the conditions of which Celeste's body was found in. So again, very graphic details. Please skip now. So the conditions of Celeste's body when it was found in the back of the Tesla on that unfortunate day in September. Celeste's body was covered in flies and maggots. And even though it had been months, everything was covered in blood. Her arms were severed. Her kneecap was severed. One hand was severed. The same hand with the missing fingers. Several attendees had to look away while this was being shown. Her face was so, quote, slippery that they could not identify a face whatsoever. Now, this photo here was a part of the first piece of evidence of that 40 terabytes that the prosecution has against David. It was that photo of Celeste's deceased body, covered in her own blood, with her severed arms and legs. I would like to make it clear that at this time, on the first day, the prosecutors were not actually looking for the death penalty. They were seeking life without parole. They were not seeking the death penalty. Now, one name that is going to pop up a lot in the following is the name Trevin Davis. Now, this is one of the many aliases that the prosecutors alleged that David used to purchase a bunch of items that were allegedly used in the dismemberment and murder of Celeste Hernandez. Trevin Davis is the most common name that is found throughout here, but obviously there are a couple more names that pop up. It was almost like he was trying to hide his tracks. David also admitted in said body footage from earlier that he did meet Celeste on Discord in late around 2020, early 21, when speaking to the police back in February of 24. He also admitted to meeting Celeste at a place called Laguna Beach on November 12th, 2023, and had last heard from her February 13th, 2024, in the same body cam footage. Now, this was basically him admitting that he knew who Celeste was. This was basically him admitting, yeah, I knew who she was, and I did hang out with her on multiple different times. I mean, we're obviously assumed that he knew her age, so he's basically admitting that he did know her age and still proceeded to hang out with her. Now, one piece of evidence that I believe is very, very key in the prosecutors confirming that David was the very last person who drove the Tesla is right here. So the prosecutors alleged that David's phone / iCloud last disconnected from the Tesla that Celeste's body was found on July 29th. Now, this proves that he was in the car the last time that it was moved, as obviously, as we saw in that security camera footage that was released earlier this year of the car being moved, that is now confirmed to have actually been David. On top of that, multiple angles of David actually parking the car and getting out of it were also shown in court, further proving that he was the very last person to move the car. I also do want to say that police still have not found that phone that was last connected to the Tesla on July 29th. They have still not been able to recover that phone. I personally believe that motherfucker threw it in the ocean. But when the news of a body being found came out, when we didn't even know, all we knew back in September was that it was David's car. Back when that news came out, Celeste's father actually reached out to the Los Angeles Police Department, fearing that it was his daughter. He then provided her, his dentist's contact information and police ended up working with the family to try and identify Celeste via her dental records. He also told investigators, that Celeste had 2 phone numbers that he knew of and a third that he did not know that was purchased by a, quote, unidentified male. Now, the final witness that was questioned in the first day was a person named Benjamin Gregor, who was the director of finance for David. Now, from this, we ended up learning that David's estimated gross earnings for 2023 to 2025 was around $10 to $11 million. And the DA ended up questioning David's director of finance on a potential financial motive for the murder, As, if you didn't know, one of the charges that David is being charged with is murder for financial gain. We didn't really learn a lot from Benjamin being questioned. One thing that we did learn that is a bit weird was that he is still in regular contact with David's mother, but apparently she's also the owner and runs his LLC, which is David Entertainment LLC. Now, what did the defense do on the first day? So Blair Burke, who is David's lead attorney on the defense, zeroed in on how the evidence was collected, preserved, and thoroughly tested. Now, when I was first reading through this, it does sound like the evidence was very mishandled. Blair first asked why the body bag wasn't held as evidence. Byers, who is the lead detective for the LAPD, stated that, quote, the advanced decomposition and bodily fluids made it impractical to keep the entire bag. Instead, they kept zippers and handles, but the rest of the bag was not tested or swabbed. Blair next ended up asking questions on the burn cage, as there was a burn cage found at David's apartment. Byers confirmed that he saw the unopened box in the home, but it was not collected as evidence or tested for biological evidence by the way of fingerprinting or any other means. Now, some of the other evidence that was collected or found, really, at David's apartment after they raided his house was 3 chainsaws. This was one of them. They found 3 chainsaws in his house, 2 in the garage, and 1 on the second floor of his home. All 3 chainsaws were tested, but none of them tested positive for blood. The LAPD, however, did not perform any further testing, nor did they compare the cut marks on Celeste to the chainsaws. An iPhone was also collected during the search on September 17th. Police claimed this belonged to David. Blair, David's attorney, challenged the investigators' claim that the iPhone recovered from his home belonged to him. She pointed to a search warrant affidavit that referenced Celeste Rivas Hernandez's iCloud account and questioned whether investigators had previously linked the phone to Celeste instead. Detective Byers ended up testifying that the affidavit referred to Celeste's email account, not the ownership of the phone. This exchange ended up becoming tense, with prosecutors objecting that Burke was being argumentative before the judge instructed both sides to move along. Now, this is David's post-murder purchases on Amazon. Now, this is where all of the aliases and the alter egos come into play. So, April 24th, around 2 days after Celeste was allegedly murdered, a shovel was purchased from Home Depot through Postmates, which is kind of like Uber Eats, but for like common day items in America. Byers testified that this was one of 3 purchases investigators identified as significant. May 1st, 2025, 2 chainsaws were purchased through Amazon using the account associated with Travin Davis. One of those chainsaws was a red and black 16-inch chainsaw, with the other one being a pink and black 6-inch handheld chainsaw. Byers testified both chainsaws were later recovered from David's garage during the September search on his place. May 3rd, 2025, an inflatable pool was purchased through Amazon by Trayvon Davis and delivered to a completely random address. I don't know what the address is. May 4th, 2025. A Makita chainsaw was ordered from Home Depot, identified through Uber/Postmate records. A Libman mop system, which is just a spin mop basically, was also purchased from Lowe's, identified through Uber/Postmate records. May 5th, a cadaver body bag labeled City Morgue was purchased through Amazon by Trayvon Davis and delivered to an address, the same address as the last one. Also on May 5th, a heavy-duty laundry bag was purchased through Amazon by Trayvon Davis and delivered to that same address. July 7th, 2025 was the burn cage, which he purchased under the alter ego Victoria Mendez. July 12th, 2025, a fireproof mat, also known as a burn mat, was purchased through the Amazon account of Trayvon Davis. So those are all of the names that he used to purchase all of these items that are allegedly involved in the dismemberment of Celeste Rivas. Now, apparently, according to these court documents, as soon as the body was discovered in the Tesla, David, his mother, and his business associates began communicating only through encrypted messaging apps like Signal. Now, if you don't know what Signal or encrypted messaging apps are, apps like Signal, WhatsApp, and Telegram, these are all encrypted messaging apps where they have something called end-to-end encryption, which means that no one, not even the police, are able to get the text messages that you exchange with other people, as they are completely encrypted onto your phone and no one is able to access them. It is one of the hardest security measures basically on earth. So there's that for you. David's director of finance also said that it was not his idea to begin using secured messaging apps, but it was actually requested by David's management team. So I think David's management team is built up of 3 or 4 people, and obviously the director of finance is still working with David's mother. A lot of fishy stuff going on there almost instantaneously when the news came out. The the financial advisor of David's said that David has a trust account that is roughly $2 million, and that he discussed with Colleen Burke, David's mum, about moving the funds to another account so that could be used for potential bail. But obviously, he never ended up getting bail. One of David's homes was also discussed as being used as collateral for the bond as well. So they had $2 million set aside and also discussed using one of David's houses as collateral for the bond. Obviously, this was never approved. He never ended up getting bail. He was held without bail. And then just some small other things to bring up from the first day that we also learned. There were some rumors going around that Celeste's body was found frozen in the back of the car, but that was proven to be false, as she was just found dismembered in the back of the car. Now, the body bag, the cadaver bag that David ordered on Amazon, contained her head and torso, but her head was still attached, which was something that was heavily debated online as whether, her head was actually still attached to her torso. The garbage bags that he ordered contained her limbs, and it also appears that her kneecap contained pieces of a blue material. And then from yesterday's testimony, it sounds like this was from either a blue chainsaw or something else. It was not from the inflatable pool, as we had heard before. And then also, according to the testimony, there were the 3 chainsaws, 2 were recovered, but one of them is still not been recovered to this day. Now, that was the end of day 1, and in my opinion, the most civil day out of this case. Now, I think there were 4 or 5 days, and trust me, it gets a lot worse the further on we go. Now, we did end up getting a 4th witness on the stand out of the 10, which was the Deputy Vice President of Finances for Interscope, which was the label that David was originally signed to. Didn't really get a lot from this, but David's Director of Finances, Benjamin, ended up coming back onto the stand to continue his testimony, stating that David's mum handled nearly all of his finances, both pre and post-incident. Benjamin also stated that David apparently never once asked how much money he was making or expecting to make. The defense ended up using this to argue that he had little involvement with his own finances and he would just purchase things at will. Now, David's defense actually tried to keep mentioning David's charity trust or donations to said charity, but it was always objected / shut down by the prosecution as it was irrelevant to the probable cause hearing. Now remember, everything that was said in this court case has to be related to probable cause. Now, everything in this case has to prove that David did or he had probable cause to murder Celeste. If it's anything unrelated, they are not able to present it and it will get shut down. So we are expected to learn a lot more when this goes to trial. Now, Benjamin did give us a name that does appear a lot more often in the future, but we only knew him at the time as Sheldon. No, not Sheldon from Big Bang. Now, Sheldon was David's live-in security guard, but allegedly Benjamin never really discussed what happened inside David's houses with him. Make sure you remember that name. Make sure you remember that security guard. Now, back to the financial side of things. The prosecution argued that since David had purchased multiple homes himself and signed contracts himself, that he had at least some sort of involvement in his own finances. Because obviously earlier, Benjamin was saying that David really had no idea how much money or what kind of money he was actually getting. So the prosecution was trying to argue against this, that he did know how much money he had, which is to play on that murder for financial gain aspect of this case. Now time to talk about the London trip. If you don't know what the London trip is, it's basically this trip that David and Celeste both took to London. Now, in America, if you are an unaccompanied minor, you need parental written permission to leave the country. And this is where a lot of people started, pointing the blame on Celeste's parents as well. Because the only way that she would have been able to leave the country and go with David on tour was to get parental permission from her parents. Now, her relationship with her parents has always been, heavily speculated and rocky and all of this stuff. Me personally, I don't know a single thing about her parents, but I do believe that her parents had some role or importance in Celeste's death. Now, back to the London trip. Benjamin was actually asked about Celeste's travel, and he says that he never really discussed it with any member of the Burke family, but he did ask Rob Morgenroth, who is one of David's management team, if it was true that she traveled to London with David. The airline tickets also seem to have been purchased from David's personal account and not associated with Mogul Vision. Now, Mogul Vision, if I'm not mistaken, is the company that his manager works for. So it appears that they were purchased under his personal account. Now, the prosecution ended this by, quote, forcibly asking whether Sheldon, the security guard, ever discussed fake IDs, parties at David's house, or drugs and alcohol, driving David and Celeste to parties, all of that sort of stuff. Gregor, Benjamin, said he did not have those conversations. Now, that line, questioning, suggested whether Sheldon spent significant time around the two. And obviously, you guys should remember his name, as he does appear a lot more often going further on. Now, Benjamin also ended up revealing a lot of David's earnings and how much he was putting into, this trust fund that he had. Now, this trust fund was a so-called Coogan trust account. Now, a Coogan trust, I'm probably saying that wrong. It is a trust account for minor performers that parents cannot access. So it's basically a way for performers and artists under the age of 18 to not get exploited by their parents for money. This is not a very big thing, but I do believe a lot more artists should start looking into this if they are under the age of 18. But that's like a whole different conversation. Now, in 2022, around $142,500 to $950,000 was put into the account. But then that very next year, around $500,000 to $3.8 million was put into this trust. Now, I believe that this is the same trust account that is also currently holding the $2 million that the financial advisors were planning to use for the bail that he never ended up getting. Now, allegedly, and this is probably one of the dumbest sentences I'm about to say this entire episode, Benjamin Gregor says he, quote, never heard Celeste's name until she was discovered in the back of the Tesla. Now, obviously, I think he is capping his ass off, but that's just my personal opinion. The prosecutors ended up asking him if he had ever heard about David taking her to nightclubs while using fake IDs. The defense ended up getting angry at this and objected, and the line of questioning was shut down. So it appears that the defense almost knows the answer to this, but they don't want the answer to get out. Now, the potential amount of money David could make from one of his contracts was around $17 million. His financial managers were ended up questioned so hard on his financials to further prove the prosecutor's special circumstance that he killed Celeste for financial gain. Now, later on, Benjamin ended up changing his grand jury testimony in court from the first day. He admitted to asking Rob Morgenroth, who was one of David's managers, what happened after Celeste had been found in the Tesla. Benjamin said, "He did tell me, yes." The financial advisor then confirmed he knew Celeste's first name, that Rob Morgenroth is who told him this. Many in the courtroom ended up coming to the conclusion that Rob Morgenroth knew Celeste was murdered and that David would end up being a suspect. Now, one very heavily speculated thing, especially after the news came out, was when was David dropped by Interscope? Some people were saying, it was in January, it was when he was arrested, all of this sort of stuff. Some people were even saying it was when the news first dropped. But we did end up getting confirmation that David was not dropped by his label until December of 2025. And then on top of that, he didn't receive any payments from them until 2026. So I'm going to guess around, February, March. Now, David, throughout this entire day, had remained, quote, focused on the courtroom monitor, appearing expressionless almost as images of Celeste was displayed. Now, I don't know exactly where TMZ reported it, but TMZ did originally report that the passport was found in one location. This was disproven in court that it was found in another location. Thought I would just throw that in there. They also found an air freshener in the car as well. They found a bunch of air fresheners apparently, but one of the air fresheners ended up saying love spelled L-U-V is in the air. I believe, this was him trying to cover the smell. Like, motherfucker, use some, spray. Don't use air fresheners if you're going to cover the smell. Now, the next witness that was brought to the stand was the LAPD detective who searched the car. Now, this is some of the information that we ended up getting from him. The first thing that was officially confirmed was that when the Tesla was found, the smell of decomposition was undeniable. He also said, again, there were multiple air fresheners in an attempt to conceal the smell. There was also a ton of insect activity due to the body, and the car was caked in dust, and it was very clear it had not been moved in months. Now, heading back to David's house when the search was executed, they did find blood allegedly seeping through the bricks next to the doormat in David's garage. Luminol was also spread inside David's garage and the Tesla, which resulted in a chemical reaction to possible blood results tracing back to Celeste. Trash bags were also found in David's garage with wipes, fabrics, and much more blood. Then Celeste's family attorney asked to, quote, make a record after being told he couldn't use his laptop in court. This guy might be top 10 dumbest attorneys of all time because he was eventually scolded by the judge for being disrespectful to the court's rules. Back to the bloodstains. The possible bloodstains found in the garage will still need to be tested to 100% confirm that they are blood. I'm surprised that they have not been tested, but they do still need to be tested to be 100% confirmed that it is blood and it is Celeste's blood. Now, there was a USB found in the Tesla. Apparently, they have not put it through as evidence. Don't know why, but I feel like that would be a really key bit of evidence to log. But it just sounds like the LAPD mishandled a lot of evidence, and this is a very common trend, in my opinion, going forwards, that LAPD mishandled a lot of potential evidence that could put David away. Now, turning to the defense. David's lead defense lawyer, Burke, pointed out investigators never, quote, chemically tested or swabbed the interior or exterior of the rear trunk. Merlo, one of the detectives that originally found the Tesla, testified that decision was based on her assessment at the time. Merlo agreed with Burke's statement that she could not determine that the reddish stains were left or who left them. Burke then also questioned whether some crime scene photos had been digitally enhanced. Merlo ended up testifying any enhanced images would have been labeled and said enhancements were only used to improve visibility. Burke also asked Merlo if something called Blue Star detected blood in the front passenger area. I'm not 100% sure what Blue Star is, but it sounds like it's almost like this blood detecting device that police in LA are able to use. Merlo testified that she could not confirm whether it had been used or detected blood in the Tesla. Now, the next witness that ended up getting called to the stand was an LAPD criminalist named Lauren Wallace. Now, Wallace was assigned to the field investigation unit, where she also testified that she had previously worked as a scientist at Biogen and had worked with the LAPD for 9 years. She also said that she also testified that she had previously processed roughly 400 crime scenes, many including vehicles. So it almost appears as this was her, niche. Now, Wallace ended up testifying that the two chainsaws that were found in the garage, the black and red one and the handheld pink one, were both tested and they returned a negative result for blood. Wallace had also noted that there were several linear cuts. There were approximately 7 in total in rubber floor mats found in David's garage. She said the cuts appeared consistent with damage caused by a sharp object, which we are led to believe is the chainsaws. Now, photographs showing the cuts, as well as several reddish stains on the floor mats, were showed to the court. Wallace testified she performed presumptive testing on the reddish stains and collected samples from those that tested positive for blood. Garbage bags filled with wipes were also covered in a brown stain. There was an inflatable pool which had a dry sheet inside, and 2 green tops with reddish stains were also recovered from his garage. It just sounds like there was a lot of blood found in his apartment, even though this motherfucker really had 5 months to get rid of it. So either this guy was sloppy as hell or he wanted to be caught. Now, that's all that really happened on the second day. Like I said, really uneventful. But the next day, day 3, we actually had the medical examiner take the stand in the witness box to go further into his examination of Celeste's body and how they came to the cause of death conclusion that they did. Now, before the third day even started and, the second day had just ended, there was a little bit of, outside beef between Beth Silverman, who is the prosecution, and Blair Beck, who is David's defense attorney. They apparently had, obviously they had several tense and awkward moments. Inside the courtroom, the judge also pointed out that since they recently went together in another case, that might be causing some tension. So I'm interested to see how that goes. And obviously, again, David was, quote, stone face again. No reactions to any of the evidence that I've previously mentioned. Now, on to day 3, where we got some of the biggest information in terms of how Celeste was found, what was found with Celeste, and how the medical examiner came to rule Celeste's death. So, on the stand, the medical examiner said that there was blue pool fragments found in Celeste's body that are being, quote, compared like puzzle pieces and matched the blue inflatable pool found in David's home, according to said medical examiner. Now, this pool was allegedly put through through a wash and dryer, but it's still tested positive for DNA and blood, apparently. Now, there's a guy who has been documenting this entire case ever since it first happened. His name, as I've mentioned previously, is P.I. Steve Fisher. Now, Steve Fisher, he's the GOAT in this situation. He was there for the first 2 days, but he was actually kicked out on the 3rd day, even though he won a seating lottery. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, the way that the public is able to watch and go in and listen to this preliminary hearing is it's kind of like a raffle, right? There are certain people, like certain amount of people that line up at the front of the door and they get a raffle ticket, and then they spin a wheel, and then whatever like number gets called goes in, and there's only around 20 people that are allowed in. Now, Steve Fisher obviously has made this case public. He wants to get justice for Celeste's family, and he was asked to leave the courtroom, and apparently he was asked to leave the room due to witness exclusion. Since he testified before the grand jury, it is not appropriate for him to be in the audience of the preliminary hearing. I personally think that is such a bullshit excuse, because this guy has made this case very public, and David's defense team has made it very clear they do not like Steve. David's lead defense attorney, Burke, has clashed with Steve on multiple different occasions, where she has verbally expressed that she does not like the fact that Steve has made this a media hellstorm, and that Beck wants to keep, this like as down low as possible, which is not going to happen, love. Like, David was one of the biggest up and coming singers of the last couple years. He had songs with Invincible, like Arcane. He had some of the biggest songs in the world. This motherfucker had like 25-30 million monthly listeners before all of this happened. This is not going to be a quiet case. This is probably one of the biggest things that's happened in Hollywood this century so far. So, I don't know what kind of bullshit you're thinking that this is going to go down quiet, but hun, it is not. Now, day 3. The judge began court on this day very visibly upset. Now, apparently, the court and the judge received an email yesterday with a Google Drive link attached to it, where someone within the courtroom was somehow recording live transmission for someone outside of state to report on, which directly violates the court rules. And then, on top of that, another person was asked to leave the courtroom for violating the no live feed policy. Now, these two are completely different people, so already some crazy shit happening on the morning of day 3. But Beth Silverman was also very upset today as well, as she had brought up someone in the back row was making negative comments towards her, and she was the one to request that Steve be booted from the room, saying, quote, "He'll post something. He posts something every day." On top of that, I'm not done. This is still going. We haven't even gotten, the judge has not said shit. There's been no evidence presented, okay? Beth Silverman also had a go at Celeste's family attorney, Patrick Steinfeld, off the record. One reporter heard her say, quote, "Push me, you'll see how far that goes. I'll pull your badge." This bitch is crazy. Absolutely fucking crazy. I don't know what is going to her head. But be aware, we had not even gotten fucking evidence yet. This was just like the judge had walked in and everyone's fucking bickering at each other. Everyone's like, ah, rah, 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 rah. Like, everyone's like fucking pissed off. Whole fam pissed. But now we finally get into the presented evidence. Blair Burke, cross-examined the forensic investigator from the day before. The defense questioned about the chainsaws and how they weren't swabbed for DNA, because apparently the handles of the two chainsaws found in the home were not swabbed for DNA since, quote, "the chainsaws themselves tested negative for blood." Blair also questioned why some items were collected despite negative testing, and then Blair also, on top of that, asked about a, quote, "third chainsaw found in a closet and why it wasn't collected." Wallace stated testing was negative and it held no forensic value. He said, quote, "If this is not the missing blue chainsaw, we are at a total of 4 chainsaws now." Investigators also found jugs of fake blood and trays in the garage that were all tested negative for real blood DNA. Wallace did not document finding the burn cage, so it appears that there was a lot of mishandling in terms of evidence and documentation in this. Now, we also got another witness to take to the stand, who is a criminologist by the name of Lisa Alejandro. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she is a part of the LAPD Trace Analysis Unit. And Lisa focused in on the inflatable pool and Celeste's clothing. Lisa provided us with the following facts. Lisa recovered hairs, fibers, plant material, and possible foam-like flakes that had become loose from the pool and examined them under a stereo microscope. She then identified 4 damaged areas on the pool, labeled A all the way to D. She described the damage as a, quote, "combination of straight linear cuts and irregular, quote, scalloped cuts, with some cuts penetrating completely through the pool's material." Photos also showed roughly a dozen smaller blue fragments that shared almost the same characteristics as the pool material. Lisa testified they could have originated from the pool, but she did not conclude they were an exact physical match because portions of the fragments were missing. Lisa then also compared missing fragments from the pool with fragments that the medical examiner office had provided, which were the ones that were found on Celeste's body. Some of these pieces fit into the pool, quote, like a missing puzzle piece. Now, Lisa has left the stand, and we start to get into the Tesla and the cell phone data related to the Tesla. Now, obviously, as I mentioned before, David's phone was, in fact, the last phone that allegedly connected to the Tesla before it was dumped and found with Celeste's body. Now, this was all on the alleged date of the murder. The dates are still obviously a bit iffy, so we're just going to range it from the 23rd to the 24th, 2025. So it started on the 23rd of April, okay, at 11:01 to 11:11 p.m. Burke's cell phone and Tesla IMSI, which is kind of like the IP address of a Tesla, were both located at the Doheny Drive residence. This is also where he got a bunch of his Amazon purchases delivered to. I believe it's one of his residences that he had bought. The cell phone tower near this address placed both at the home. 11:31 to 11:35. Burke's cell phone began moving away from this residence. The data suggests that the phone and the Tesla were traveling westbound, possibly on Sunset Boulevard. 12:04 a.m. next day, so it's midnight. Burke's phone placed an outgoing call to Celeste Rivas Hernandez. This call went directly to voicemail. A LAPD officer testified this could mean her phone was either off in airplane mode or outside network coverage. Now, a full hour later at 1:28 a.m., cell phone tower records placed Burke's phone near State Route 151 in Santa Barbara County. Tesla data also showed the vehicle in the same general area, so it's very clear that David is driving this vehicle, as his phone is moving in the same general vicinity area as this Tesla. Now, here's where, not a lot of stuff happens. Around 4:03 to 7:07 a.m. in the morning, the phone remained connected to northern cell towers before returning south. And by 7:07 a.m., both the phone and the Tesla had returned towards the Dowie residence. Now, a map was shown placing, the phone and the Tesla near a remote area off the SR 154 highway, where investigators later recovered evidence like Celeste's passport. So it appears that this drive here could have been him disposing of stuff like a passport and clothes and stuff like that. Now, the following data is on the date of Celeste's dismemberment and all the stuff afterwards. So, this next couple stuff happens between May 8th and May 9th. So, 8 p.m., May 8th. Tesla data and phone data were located, placing them at this Dowie residence. Around 1 a.m. next day, May 9th. Tesla data showed the vehicle back on the SR 154 highway corridor in Santa Barbara County. 1:50 to 1:51 a.m. Cell phone and Tesla records showed nearly simultaneous connections to the same area, with the same LAPD officer testifying the two devices continued to travel together. 5:15 a.m. Tesla data showed the vehicle had returned to the Dowie residence. It is unclear what happened on this day. I'm sure we will find out a lot more of what happened. I personally believe he might have gone out to go shopping for, trash bags or something like that, because this is the day that he allegedly dismembered Celeste. Now, at the end of the month on May 31st, 2025, there was a bit more stuff that happened. It's kind of just like the same thing, 1:25 to 5:52 p.m., David's phone started near the Dowie residence before traveling towards the SR 154 area. Then around 4:47 to 4:48 p.m., the cell phone and Tesla records connected to the same tower, so this proves that he was traveling in said Tesla again. Then around 6 p.m. to 8:20 p.m., data showed the phone and the Tesla traveling back to the same residence. So this motherfucker was doing a lot of driving in this Tesla for no reason. I have no idea why this guy was doing this. Now, I am about to talk a little bit about some of the clothes that Celeste was wearing. So some of the stuff is a bit gory. So just, again, another heads up. If this is too uncomfortable for you, please skip ahead or, stop listening. So Celeste's clothing was in very, very poor condition with a very strong odor and significant deterioration and heavy soiling. She was allegedly wearing a pair of Skechers socks, a Victoria's Secret thong, a heavily soiled Forever 21 tube top that may have originally been yellow, and black leggings that appeared to have been cut in half. All of these clothes were wet, covered in dirt, and insects. Alejandro, who testified again earlier, explained that the heavy soiling prevented her from performing some of the comparison testing she had been asked to conduct. Now, while examining the leggings, Alejandro said that she recovered dark blue and medium blue plastic fragments that were visually similar to those submitted by the LA County Medical Examiner's Office. These exhibits also showed a separate black fragment that Alejandro compared to the leggings. She also collected hairs, fibers, other trace particles, and 2 yellowish stains from the black fragments using sterile swabs, but could not complete the analysis because of the deteriorated condition of the clothing. Now it's time for our favorite defense lawyer, Blair Burke, to cross-examine Lisa. Blair questioned Lisa's examination, stating that the comparison of these blue fragments were only based on physical characteristics and not DNA testing. Blair also pushed on Lehendro's statement earlier on where she claimed there were possible shoe prints in the inflatable pool. Lisa said it was too difficult for any impression to be lifted, but she was not given any shoes to compare the prints to anyways. She also said that the pool's uneven, thick surface, or the possibility that the impressions were not made in dust could have all prevented the recovery. We also got a bit more of a condensed timeline of the day that Celeste was unfortunately ended. So, Celeste pulls up to David's house in an Uber at around 10 past 10 p.m., and then David began moving away from his home at 11:31 p.m. So it is alleged that between 10 past 10 p.m. and 11:31 p.m., that is the time period in which he murdered Celeste. He then obviously made that call to Celeste's phone, which was at 12:04 a.m., while he was already heading north towards Santa Barbara, where he dumped, her passport and stuff like that. Now, again, David was just sitting there looking emotional. Like, this guy thinks he's really him. He thinks he's fucking mogging. This guy does not give a singular fuck. He really thinks he's getting away with this. And that's the thing I genuinely find crazy. Now, multiple blood-stained items were found in David's home that did eventually test positive for DNA consistent with Celeste. So this does prove, well, in my opinion, that Celeste was at one point bleeding out at David's house. Now, before the afternoon session, David was apparently seen smiling, nodding, and casually speaking with his defense attorneys, Marilyn Bednarski and our favorite, Blair Burke. His demeanor appeared relaxed, so this guy genuinely thinks he's getting away with it. That's the craziest part I find from this. He genuinely thinks he's getting away with this. This motherfucker is smiling. This guy is happy with what he did. Put this motherfucker, the death penalty ain't fucking enough. The death penalty ain't enough. You guys need to bury this motherfucker under the prison. Genuinely. Now, one piece of evidence that I found a bit confusing was a black trash bag. Now, this trash bag was taken in as evidence because it allegedly contained DNA from not one, but 4 individuals, which includes 2 sets of male DNA, one of them being confirmed as David. Now, the part of this that I find confusing was that Celeste's DNA was not on this bag. I'm sure eventually in, the actual hearing and trial, we will be able to hear whose DNA is on that. In my personal opinion, it is still probably fucking Neo, his manager. Who fucking knows? Now, Detective William Rokia, that I had mentioned earlier, testified that according to surveillance footage, license plate reader data, and Tesla records, the car, referring to the Tesla, was, quote, definitely not moved or driven between July 29th and September 5th when the car was found. The last movement for the car was at approximately 9 p.m. July 29th, and as obviously we know from the previous day, there is a clear video footage of David parking the car for the last time and going into his home. David's lawyer Marilyn ended up cross-examining William after this. Marilyn confirmed that records were also reviewed concerning Celeste's phone, but William did not personally examine any GPS data for her phone. She also questioned whether the maps shown to the jurors were the exact locations. William agreed they do not provide precise GPS coordinates. William testified his analysis instead identifies a device's general location and estimates its distance from a cell tower, but cannot pinpoint an exact latitude or longitude. He also said they could not clearly see who was driving the Tesla when David traveled to Santa Barbara. Instead, they came to the conclusion that it was David based on driving and cell phone data moving in tandem. Marilyn also pointed out that the latitude and longitude coordinates shown on Williams' exhibit differed from the coordinates provided by the California Highway Patrol officer Sean Barosto, I think is how I say it, during Wednesday's testimony. She also pointed out that the exhibit marked the location where Celeste's passport was recovered, and William ended up testifying that the two sets of coordinates were very close and was largely the same location. So it's very clear that Marilyn, David's other defense lawyer, is trying to make it seem that it was not him driving the car. She's trying to just say that, like, look, the California highway gave different coordinates than you're giving us. It's very, very stingy shit. But, I mean, that's what you gotta do, right? Like, whether you agree he did it or not, as his defense, you have to really do it. The next witness to take the stand was LAPD criminalist Samantha Tosh, where she testified the following. She said that she was able to put together an entire DNA profile from a toenail sample collected from Celeste, provided to her by the medical examiner. So whoever Samantha is the fucking GOAT. Because how was she able to put an entire DNA profile together from a fucking toenail? Absolutely insane. She also developed a reference DNA profile of David from a cheek swab. So David did comply and give his DNA. I mean, they were bound to get it anyways. Like, this motherfucker, probably, nutted all over his house. Let's be so for real. One bloodstain in the trunk of the Tesla produced a single DNA file that did match the DNA profile that Samantha created of Celeste, so it matched Celeste's DNA. She also said that the statistical analysis showed the profile was approximately 1 septillion times more likely to have originated from Celeste than an unrelated individual. Septillion is basically fucking a billion billions or some shit like that. She also said that a second bloodstain recovered from the Tesla also produced a single source female DNA profile consistent with Celeste. And obviously that had the same statistical conclusion that obviously it was Celeste's DNA. Now, back to the garage. Multiple bloodstains, again, were found in David's garage, and they came back as a single source female DNA profile that is consistent with Celeste. These bloodstains that matched were on, quote, the rubber mat, the towing machine, the Tesla charger, a green tarp, and hand wipes. So bloodstains were on all of those things, and they came back and matched Celeste. Now it was time for the defense's cross-examination of Samantha. Blair established that Samantha was not the primary DNA analysis for this case. Samantha confirmed that this report was done by another analysis. Blair also asked about Samantha's communications with prosecutor Beth Silverman, who was the lead prosecutor for this case. Tosh testified Silverman reviewed with her the topic she would be asked about so she could review the reports. Blair says because you weren't the analysis. Blair also questioned Tosh about her background in analyzing DNA, and Tosh agreed that DNA testing cannot determine how DNA was deposited on an item, when it was deposited, or what activity led to its presence. Tosh also agreed that DNA testing cannot determine how DNA... Tosh agreed that DNA testing cannot determine how DNA was deposited on an item. She also testified the lab results cannot tell whether DNA was left through direct touch or another type of transfer, so kind of like spitting or, blood, stuff like that. Blair then asked whether Tosh could say how or when Celeste's DNA ended up on the rowing machine. As mentioned previously, Tosh cannot. She could not specifically say where the DNA came from, and Tosh ended up agreeing the same limitations applied to the green tarp, black rubber mat, charger, and all of the other stuff. Blair also questioned whether the DNA necessarily originated from blood. Tosh testified she could not specifically say the DNA came from blood, but said it was possible that the DNA originated from skin cells. Now, this would make sense as well because Celeste would constantly be around David, so she was bound to get some of her dead skin cells onto his things. Again, that is not me defending David, I'm just saying it kind of makes sense. Now, the last witness of this day was the Deputy Medical Examiner, Grant Ho. This is the guy that conducted Celeste's autopsy. Okay, so this is the guy that we have been waiting for. This is the guy that is gonna give us the answers that we really, really need. He said that she was 5'2" and weighed 71 pounds at the time her autopsy was performed. He described her remains as markedly decomposed. He observed trauma to the body consistent with dismemberment. He also said that Celeste was wearing braces at the time. Now, for the first time in this entire court case, David reportedly looked nervous during the discussions of the blood in his garage matching DNA to Celeste. So I don't know if it's, hitting him that it's like, oh shit, this might not actually work. I might actually be cooked here. But I digress. That was the end of that day. A very, very full-on heavy day. Now, the next day, was also another full-on day. This is where we really get into the nitty-gritty of how Celeste was found, about her decomposition, and the way she was found. Now, I do want to remind you all, I'm about to go into some very, very fucked up details. We are about to, when I was first reading all of these updates that Mads had posted, I was fucking shocked. I had no words. Absolutely no words. This shit is insane. So if you have any reaction to the things I'm about to talk about on this day, please skip off, fuck off, go listen to some music, please. Your mental well-being is my number one priority. Now, David's defense team showed up to court on this day looking very happy and in good spirits. I don't know what changed, but they're always fucking happy, I guess. But yeah, here we go. So, the first thing that came out on this day was that Celeste's DNA was found in red stains in the lower compartment of the rear trunk of the Tesla. Not the back, the rear. This suggests that she might have been stored there before she was dismembered, so she was probably killed, put in the Tesla, and then dismembered later and put back into the Tesla. Photos of Celeste's body during the autopsy were shown into the court this morning. And then, for the very first time in these hearings, David looked away from the evidence being shown on the screen where they displayed Celeste's decomposed, dismembered remains. The very first time this guy looked away. Celeste's parents also skipped the morning portion of court. As I mentioned previously, they had attended every single day of this court. They skipped the morning portion of court, likely to avoid, seeing the daughters of their fucking daughter dead. And a lot of reporters were saying that the photos were very graphic. Now, here are all the graphic parts I'm about to go over. Okay. The odor from Celeste's decomposition was enough to smell from the hallway outside the autopsy room. Due to how bad she was decomposed, it was very difficult to tell how long she'd been deceased. Beth asked Dr. Grant Ho if her remains were consistent with having been deceased since April 23rd, where he responded, possibly, and it was, quote, at least weeks. there was one dismemberment site on each arm. There were 2 dismemberment sites on each side of the lower body. The dismemberment extended through bone, not just the soft tissue. Beth seemed to be highlighting the fact that only power tools can cut through bones. The legs were dismembered at the thigh and again below the knee. The right thigh was cut lower than the left, meaning the cuts occurred at different positions on the legs. Beth asked whether or not this means the legs were dismembered one at a time, to which Dr. Grant said potentially. He was also asked whether the injuries were consistent with a powered cutting tool, such as a chainsaw, with Dr. Grant again responding potentially. Now, Dr. Grant could not identify if the dismemberment occurred before or after her death during the autopsy, which means that there is a very real possibility that she was dismembered before she died, which is absolutely atrocious. Now, the amputated fingers that were recovered, they were inside of the Tesla with her body. So, they cut off her fingers that, had, like David's name and the shush, like the matching tattoos. But they just left it in the Tesla with her body. No idea why. Fucking lazy ass job. Now, a lot of reporters were kind of putting out different things. We were getting like a lot of mixed responses from the reporters, with some of them saying that David looked away from the photos, while others say he stared again at the screen with no emotion. Now, we are about to get again into some more gory stuff, so please skip ahead if you don't fuck with any of this. So, Beth, the prosecutor, displayed a full-body graphic autopsy photograph with Celeste's body on a metal table. David apparently continued watching the screen without any visible reaction. Celeste's face showed partial skeletonization with the left eye missing and significant liquidification of soft tissue. Another graphic photo of Celeste's discolored raw torso after it had been removed from the Tesla. David still continued staring at the screen without any visible reaction. Injuries on the left chest and the right abdomen were also shown. The wound that penetrated Celeste's liver could have been deeper before, but shrank during decomposition. It was also very difficult to track the wound fault due to said decomposition, and the wound traveled from the front to back of her abdomen, suggesting obviously she was stabbed in the abdomen. Another graphic photograph showed what Dr. Grant described as a, quote, cortical disruption of the ribs. He testified it represented a penetrating chest injury with the wound traveling through the skin, soft tissue, and into the chest cavity. Because of the condition of the remains, he said it was impossible to determine the wound's endpoint. Dr. Grant then testified the injury had chipped away part of the bone, confirming it was trauma-induced, and estimated the wound penetrated at least 2 inches. Another graphic photograph was shown of the severed right knee, taken right before the autopsy, to which Dr. Grant testified showed blue fragments embedded within the cut surface. He could not, however, determine what caused the blue plastic fragments to become embedded in the cut surfaces of the bone. Beth, lead prosecutor, then posed a hypothetical question. Now, I'm going to paraphrase this because it was apparently a really long question. If the victim had been placed in a blue inflatable pool after being killed to contain the blood while the body was dismembered with a chainsaw, would that scenario be consistent with the embedded blue plastic fragments? Now, the defense actually objected to this, arguing the question lacked foundation and was leading, and that Dr. Grant already said he did not know. The judge of the hearing actually overruled the objection, to which Dr. Grant responded with, Possibly. Dr. Grant then goes on to say that the left chest injury was life-threatening, explaining it could have introduced air into the chest cavity, impairing breathing or directly injured the lung. Beth then asked how long it would take for someone to bleed out from a chest injury, with Dr. Grant replying, minutes. Beth then pressed, asking if it could take up to an hour. Dr. Grant said he could not specify, only that it could happen within minutes. Nothing that there are many minutes in an hour, obviously. Beth asked whether someone would likely die within an hour with no medical treatment. And Dr. Grant said that is out of his area of expertise. Dr. Grant also testified the average adult has about 5 liters of blood, and he said that a typical 14-year-old would have less, though he did not know the exact amount off the top of his head. And then in regards to Celeste's liver injury, Dr. Ho testified the resulting hemorrhaging likewise could have become life-threatening within minutes, potentially extending up to an hour depending on the circumstances. Now, it appears, that the prosecution, they're almost like trying to prove that it could have taken an hour for Celeste to bleed out from her injuries, and that David, stood by and watched before leaving to go to Santa Barbara. So the prosecution is very much trying to be like, he killed her, but it took an hour, because there was, that hour portion between when she pulled up to the house and when he left. There was, around that hour and 20 minutes. Now, Dr. Grant also testified again on this day. So Dr. Grant Ho has now testified on 3 days. On this day, he testified that the manner of death was consistent with a homicide. So he did rule that the manner of death was homicide. Prosecutor Beth Silverman asked whether the overall circumstances of the case, including the dismemberment and the concealment of the body, factored into his determination. Ho answered yes, along with the lack of any other reasonable explanation for the death. He also testified that there were traces of ethanol, also known as alcohol, that were extremely low and could have been caused by the decomposition. A benzodiazepine was also detected, but Dr. Ho testified that the substances played no part in her death. Now, time for the cross-examination from the defense attorneys of Dr. Grant Ho. So, Marilyn Bednarski asked whether investigators discussed details of the case with him before he finalized his report. Ho testified he did not recall any specific conversations and said investigators had provided very limited information at that stage of the investigation. Grant was confident in his statement that Celeste had been dead for at least weeks due to the level of decomposition and could not be more precise, and said that weeks can also add up to months. When asked why it took approximately 3 months to finalize the autopsy, Dr. Grant Ho said he was, quote, awaiting toxicology and testing. The defense inquired about COD possibly being an overdose. He said that the toxicology reports did not indicate anything leading to a overdose, and he also agreed with Marilyn that just as decomposition can affect anatomical findings, it can affect toxicology reports as well. Now, what I'm about to say is probably one of the most disgusting, heinous, unhumane sentences that could ever come out of this case. Defense attorney Marilyn suggested the possibility that Celeste inflicted the wounds upon herself, questioning if the medical evidence alone could rule that out. Yes, you heard me right. The defense attorney Marilyn suggested the possibility that Celeste stabbed herself. I have no words. Absolutely no words. The fact you can even consider that is insane. The fact that you can even consider the fact that she stabbed herself is absolutely blasphemous. I have no words for that at all. She also asked if a decedent history with being suicidal, violent, and or using drugs can be helpful in a death penalty. Grant responded with potentially yet again. Marilyn asked whether or not the medical examiner could determine if Celeste was holding the instrument that caused the fatal wounds. Grant replied he could not determine this. She then asked him if it would be possible. Ho said it is a consideration, but there would likely be signs of hesitation marks or superficial wounds if that were the case. Marilyn concluded by having the medical examiner confirm that he cannot determine the exact situations in which the wounds occurred with medical evidence alone. Marilyn asked if there were signs of a struggle. Ho said that due to the advanced decomposition of her body, he could not tell. The fact that I've just read that is... I have no words. I'm never speechless. But this is one of the only times where I'm speechless. I have no words for what I've just read to you guys. The fact that they can suggest that she killed herself is... the fact that you're suggesting someone can kill themselves is not blasphemy. But the fact that you are trying to pin the stabbings, multiple stabbings, by the way, on herself as a suicide is fucking blasphemy. Absolute blasphemy. And if you, in the slightest, still believe that David Anthony Burke is not guilty of murdering Celeste Rivas Hernandez, you need to take a fucking look in the mirror. Because his defense right now is, oh, she stabbed herself. She grabbed the knife, stabbed herself, and David took chainsaws to her and dismembered her. If you truly believe that happened, I have no words for you. Genuinely, I have no words for you. Absolutely no words. Okay, back to the case. Marilyn asked apparently several times about the penetration to the liver and the diaphragm, which apparently could not be seen in the photos presented. Dr. Grant said photos would not be able to show a wound track. That was only done through autopsy. The defense pushed, asking if he recalled any pictures that would show the path, and he said there is not. They pressed about the lungs, and Ho said they appeared to be intact, but again, due to that severe decomposition, there could have been injuries that they couldn't see, Marilyn then questioned Dr. Ho on whether or not he could prove if blood from the wounds bled externally or internally, asking if there is any physical evidence to substantiate that any blood exited the body. And Dr. Ho said there is nothing he can point to that would disprove that. Dr. Ho clarified his statement about a possible gunshot. There was a disruption of the ribs, but he couldn't determine the cause and said that gunshot was only a possibility that would need to be further proven. The defense pushed again on this, saying that there was no penetration object found to prove a gunshot, and Dr. Ho said correct. The defense asked if there was any evidence to suspect a gunshot, to which Ho replied with, "I have no way to prove it. It is only speculation." After this, a very graphic photo was shown of Celeste's hands and her severed fingers, again proving that her fingers were not missing, they were just severed and left in the Tesla with her body. Some of the images shown on this day, were so graphic that it's been reported that some of the people in attendance decided to leave the courtroom. Absolutely insane. Now, Detective Corey Farley, who was, again, another detective on this case, described graphic sexual content of Celeste and David being found. So again, another warning of everything that I'm about to say. It's messed up. Oh my god, I cannot believe I'm about... I'm so sorry, Mads, that you had to type this, and I feel even worse having to say this. David referred to his genitalia as, quote, will, while texting Celeste. On top of that, there were also text messages that show that David did have knowledge of Celeste being a missing person back in 2024. All of what I'm about to say for like the next couple minutes is CSAM. If you don't know what CSAM is, it's child SA material. I'm going to try and minimize how much bleeping I have to do. So here goes nothing. Numerous photos were shown to the court documenting Burke and Celeste's relationship, including Burke holding what appeared to be a ring, photos of Celeste with dyed red hair, photos of the two kissing in bed, photos of the two FaceTiming. There were also two photos of a female hand with the tattoo David in red cursive letters, wearing the ring that David was holding in the prior photo. Additionally, a lock screen image showing the pair topless and embracing was mentioned but not shown. Farrell testified the phone contained sexually explicit photos and videos that he said documented a sexual relationship. I hate using the word relationship between Burke and Celeste. He testified the images appeared to have been taken inside David's room and included nude images of both individuals. Farrell described images of both David and Celeste performing the deed and the oral deed on one another, as well as images of their privates. In the middle of discussing these nude images, Celeste's parents left the courtroom after, obviously being overwhelmed during this graphic testimony. Celeste's mother sobbed as she exited the room, with Beth Silverman saying, I'm sorry, as they exited. Farrell then testified investigators recovered text messages between Burke and Celeste from Burke's iCloud account. The first communication was dated August 8th, 2022, when Celeste was just 11 years old. The last recovered message was dated April 23rd, 2025. Farrell testified the messages corroborated the photos discussing stuff from their sexual relationship, plans to meet, travel between Lake Enslaw and Burke's home, their future together, pregnancy concerns, and abortions and emergency contraception. That's right. I will talk about it a bit later, but they did talk about abortions and emergency contraceptions. Now, one thing that happened on this day that I find one of the most disgusting things is Operation Awesome, or OA as referred to in some texts. Now, this was a plan with David and Celeste for Celeste to run away from home and live with David. Now, I find this the craziest fucking coincidence and stitch up of all time, but a Vegas trip was confirmed to have been booked for the two at the Trump Hotel, which I find to be the funniest shit ever. The fact that David, the pedophile, rapist, murderer, booked a hotel to stay at a rapist, sexual assaulter, and president of the United States hotel. I find that absolutely insane. Now, time to talk about these abortions. I still remember seeing the news for this come out, and it's fucking disgusting. At least one abortion was confirmed to have taken place in January of 2024, just 3 months before David allegedly killed Celeste. Obviously, the bodyguard hired by David, was confirmed to have driven Celeste and Burke around in all of the text messages that were sifted through. But during this time, David remained seated, showing no emotion, just occasionally shifting in his seat and or tilting his head. Now, I want you to be aware, okay? Back to this abortion stuff, okay? The abortion in January of 2024, Celeste was 13 and David was 18. 18, 1-8 at the time of this abortion. Very clearly fucking illegal. Very clearly fucking illegal. There were also text messages between the two on this day, with David saying, "My mum said I have to ask this question. Don't get offended, but is it mine?" To which Celeste responds with, "Of course it is, David." David wrote in some more of the messages that were revealed that he did not want anyone knowing that he was doing the deed with Celeste until they were married. On June 19th, 2024, Celeste asks if his mum knows that the two have had the deed. He responds, "She thinks that's the first thing we're going to do when we see each other." That's a quote, by the way. That's a fucking quote. That is a quote from David in the text messages where he says, "She thinks that's the first thing we're going to do when we see each other." The very first, that is, what the fuck? What the actual fuck? And then, on August 30th, 2024, Celeste expresses regret about this abortion, saying she killed her baby for him. David also accuses Celeste of initiating kissing and sex, saying he folds every time, saying, quote, "I followed your lead." What the fuck? She is... I have no words. Genuinely have no fucking words. I would also just like to fucking mention that during the last hour of the court on this day, David did not give a singular fuck. This guy was hunched over the table, scribbling on a fucking notepad and flipping through the pages. Only occasionally did this man glance up, frown while reading the screen, and then turn back to scribbling on his notes. This guy does genuinely not give a shit. This guy does not give a singular fuck about what has happened. Also, it was confirmed that David and Celeste had a tape made. Not the duct tape kind, the movie kind. When Celeste asked if there was a movie, he wrote, "Few of them, yup." Celeste asked Burke not to release it, and Burke said, quote, "You," in all caps, "don't leak it." What the fuck? I'm gonna read through some of these text messages that David was sending, between him and Celeste. August 30th, 2024 at 2:08 a.m. If one thing is clear from this motherfucker does not sleep, I guess. Like, this motherfucker is up till like 3 in the morning, 7 in the morning at times. Like, I guess this guy just does not sleep. At 2:08 a.m., Celeste texts, "Realistically, I care about you. I killed my kid. First you." I think she's meant to say for you. David then replies, "It has to be in the right time with the least complications." Celeste says, "I still would have been there for him." David then replies, "Yeah, selfishly because it would have also been mine." Celeste then replies to that saying, "David, I'm going to have to lie to people around me, even my kid, for the rest of my life. I don't like talking about it because it gets me really upset, but I'd do it again." And then also in June of 2024, David texts, "I can't wait to move in together without the cops bitching, baby. You gon' be with me everywhere." In March, Celeste wrote to him, "We can be friends, but like online, I don't want anything to do with you in person anymore." David replies, "Oh, okay." Celeste says, "All we do is just do it and hang out, man. I want more than that for myself. Without a label too is insane." Celeste then proceeded to have at least one other abortion in June of 2024, when she texted him saying, "Let this abortion be the last one till we have the real one." Now, a little bit more on Operation Awesome. Not a lot, but a little bit more on that. Apparently, it was their plan to have Sheldon, the bodyguard, drive David to a stop sign by Celeste's house, and to have Celeste run and get into the car with all her belongings quickly, with Sheldon also allegedly driving Celeste and David around frequently, including to clubs where they were both using fake IDs. Yeah. Fucking hell. Yeah. Now we are up to the final day. This is the day where we found out that David would go to trial. Now, what we were expecting from this day was some of the witnesses from the like a couple days before, like Gorey, they will continue their testimony, regarding the text messages and the photo evidence found on David's phone and iCloud, with the defense also having the opportunity to cross-examine Gorey. It was also very unclear if the judge would make her decision today, because in California, these type of decisions aren't really made day of, but under special circumstances, it could take weeks. So this was the day for the judge to finally decide if there is probable cause for a trial to happen. And if she decided yes, which she did, trial is not immediate and would likely take a year or two to even begin. Keep that in mind, please. Now, to start off this day, some of the text message evidence shown on this day showed Celeste asking David if he had had sex with Aisha. Now, if you don't know, Aisha was one of David's close friends and confidants who had been the subject of a lot of rumors regarding, Celeste and David as to whether David had cheated on Celeste with Aisha. She's been the subject of a lot of scrutiny in Hollywood. She's like, I honestly don't know who the fuck she is. If you know who she, I know who she is, but I don't know what the fuck she does. All I know is she's a fucking influencer. Again, David entered the court, in good spirits, smiling and whispering to the fucking lawyers. So this motherfucker is in La La Land. This guy is over the fucking moon. This guy's like, hee. Now, David and Celeste remained in regular contact throughout mid-March of 2025. This was after, Celeste had said, we can be friends. Basically, almost breaking up with David as she realized she was almost being exploited. Well, not almost. She was being exploited, sorry. But they did keep in regular contact throughout mid-March and exchanged around 8,000 to 9,000 text messages before her death in April. Beth focused on the conversations leading up to Celeste's death, so a week beforehand, April 22nd to 26th, which included messages about David's friendship and supposed relationship with Aisha Collins, with the following text messages being from April 23rd. David, why do I have to show you everything I get? Celeste, because I had your embryo in me. Get Uber, Queen. 33070. Getting it, says David. So I believe, they're ordering an Uber and that's the fucking Uber code. Celeste then says Jameson Street. David then says 4 minute, 1 minute. He's there. 8:39 p.m. Girly Pop, I'm almost there. Open your door if you're home, said Celeste. David, got you. Again, at this point, no emotion from David. 10 past 10 p.m. David texts Celeste. Gate open, door unlocked. 10:31 p.m. Uber said you're here. Where you at? After this, David repeatedly texted Celeste asking where she was, with his final text messages being sent around 11:41 p.m. Now, on the cross-examination, Blair Burke challenged Detective Farrell's recollection of early communications between David and Celeste. Farrell repeatedly testified that he had reviewed thousands of messages and could not remember individual conversations without reviewing Celebrate reports. Burke also established that investigators found Celeste had represented herself as both 16 and 18 at different times, and noted the defense had prepared its own compilation of raw iCloud message data, to which Farrell said he did review this in their messages. Burke introduced additional portions of the 22nd to 23rd conversations that were not discussed during direct examination. She pointed to messages in which Celeste threatened to, quote, mutilate David, kill him, ruin his career, contact his mother, leak damaging information, and spread information to people in his professional life. Detective Farrell agreed those messages existed and testified he did not recall seeing Celeste threaten to report Burke to police or reference in participating in a criminal prosecution. Detective Farrell then testified that Celeste's family, friends, and David's mother knew about their relationship. That is right. Detective Farrell testified under oath that Celeste's family, friends, and David's own mother knew about their illegal relationship. He said that David attended church with Celeste and her family. spent time with them at amusement parks. And this part was one of the most debated parts of this case. He also confirmed that Celeste's parents signed off on a motorized document to allow David to take Celeste to London. Remember how I told you to remember that London trip? This is why. The only way that Celeste could get to London is if her parents signed off on a legal document that says that she can be an unaccompanied minor with this individual over the age of 18. And her parents signed it. Celeste obviously attended David's Coachella performance shortly before her death with a bunch of David's close friends. This now has caused a lot of people to start going after a bunch of David's different friends, accusing them of possibly being involved in this case. Burke attempted to question Farrell about allegations that Celeste had previously committed domestic violence against David, and made reference to Celeste allegedly bringing up her bipolar disorder, which Beth Silverman objected. The judge ruled those topics were not relevant to the probable cause issues being considered at the preliminary hearing. This would be used as evidence by defense in a trial. Blair Burke seemed to be insinuating here that Celeste was abusive towards David, using the following text message as proof. This is from Celeste. "Oh my fucking God. I swear to God I will kill you. She was in my damn seat. I will strangle you to fucking death, bro. I will tell my dad so many fucking lies about you. Dead ass, I will end your career and your life. I will damage anything." Now, I want you to keep in mind, that is a little fucking girl. And if you think after that text message, oh, now I kind of understand. No. If you can still defend David after that, you are a disgusting piece of shit. Genuinely. The defense ended up concluding by focusing on the investigation that of Celeste's arrival at David's house. Farrell testified investigators determined David was playing a virtual reality game with others online while Celeste was traveling in the Uber. He also agreed that there are no eyewitnesses who saw Celeste exit the Uber or enter the residence. No surveillance video showing either Celeste or David outside the home, and no witnesses who observed what occurred during the roughly 20-minute period investigators believe encompassed Celeste's death. Farrell further acknowledged the Uber driver had no independent recollection of the ride and could not determine the exact drop-off time. Obviously, as I said earlier, Celeste had threatened to, quote, mutilate David's penis in a text message in response to an argument about Aisha and if David had had sex with her, and that Celeste had also mentioned suicide in her text with David. Now, this was basically the end of it. You know, court was on break. They were on a 15-minute break. And both the defense and the prosecution had rested with no more evidence or witnesses at that time. Although, however, the prosecution did ask for a few more minutes to collect thoughts before final arguments. But in the final moments of, this cross-examination of Blair's cross-examination with Farrell, she pushed that there was not video evidence or data showing what Celeste and David were doing between this alleged period of 10 past 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. on April 23rd, 2025, the time that it is believed to have Celeste killed. Blair then said that there was not any electronic communication or text messages between that time period confirming what the pair were doing. Farrell again answered correct. Blair also asked whether investigators determined that David was away from the home during the day of April 23rd. Farrell replied, "I don't know," when Burke followed up by asking whether David's activities that day had been investigated. Farrell again said he did not know. Blair then noted that investigators were aware of text messages between Celeste and David, indicating he was away from the home during the day, attending an Interscope meeting, with Farrell confirming saying he was aware of this meeting. Burke said no more questions, and when given the opportunity to respond, Beth Silverman established why there was no video evidence. She asked Farrell to clarify this, and Farrell said because of the amount of time that passed while the body had been concealed, video evidence was not available when the investigation began. Silverman had nothing further to add. Now, I do want to point out that during Detective Farrell's testimony, David stared straight ahead while the text messages were being read, looking at the screen in that, notable casual manner that he's had basically this entire court proceeding. Strangely, while defense was cross-examining Farrell, I keep saying Farrell, David remained looking down throughout most of Blair's questions to Farrell. Now, before I get to the final arguments and speeches from the defense, we've got a little bit more text messages to go through the day of Celeste's death. This was all on April 22nd, by the way. David, how are you going to say you feel distance when you've been pushing me away since the beginning of the year? Celeste, if I see you with Aisha one more time, I will make anonymous accounts. You won't be able to avoid me leaking all that shit I got about you. Celeste, and this was like a little bit later on, there's like a time period between this. So I can find your mum's number and text her anytime, so don't test me. David replies, okay, laughing emoji, to which Celeste also replies saying, I also have Nathan's fiance on my phone as well, so word will spread to your work girl. The last couple text messages that David had sent to Celeste was still along the lines of, Uber said you're here, where you at? Hello, bro, Celeste, bro, blocking me, hello, I'ma call Jen, bro, you're scaring me. Then later, what the fuck, where are you? And please. With that being the final text message when he was allegedly heading to Santa Barbara. Now it is time for the final arguments. Mads has kindly summed them all up for each of the special circumstances, as if we went through word by word, I would be here for another 20 fucking minutes. So, in relation to the lying in wait charge, the defense argued the prosecution failed to prove David intentionally concealed his purpose, watched and waited for a substantial period, and carried out a surprise attack from a point of advantage. She argued the evidence instead showed Celeste Hernandez initiated the meeting instead on coming over, despite David telling her no, while also pointing out David was online gaming with two friends shortly before she arrived, which he said undercut any claim that David was lying in wait. Bednarski argued the fatal front-to-back stab wound was inconsistent with a surprise attack. In relation to the financial gain charge, Bednarski argued that there was no evidence David killed Celeste for financial gain because the prosecution failed to identify any concrete financial benefit that would result from her death. The defense said David wanting to protect his music career was too speculative, arguing future earnings and career prospects are not the type of identifiable financial gain required under the law. In relation to the killing a witness to a crime charge, the defense argued the prosecution failed to prove David's purpose was to prevent Celeste from serving as a witness in a criminal proceeding, as she made no threat to go to the police. Overall, throughout all of this, Bednarski said that there was no evidence in this case, only circumstantial evidence, pointing to the lack of video footage to data to prove what David was doing during the minutes Celeste was suspected to be killed. Now, the prosecution's final statements on each of the murder circumstances are what I'm about to talk about here now. To the point of financial gain, Beth Silverman argued that David's motive was financial, claiming Celeste had become a threat to his rapidly growing music career. David had recording contracts worth millions of dollars, significant assets, in a career that depended heavily on his public image. She stated a firm monetary amount was not required, and future gain was valid under this circumstance. She maintained David stood to protect the financial value of his career and future earnings by eliminating that threat, making financial gain a motivating factor in the killing. To the point of witness killing, Beth Silverman stated David killed Celeste to prevent her from reporting their relationship to friends, family, and on the internet. As they threatened to in their text exchanges, she argued that David understood she posed a serious legal risk and killed her to silence her before she could report him, leading to a future criminal proceeding. According to Silverman, witness killing stands even if there is not a current criminal proceeding at that time of death. Now, as you probably are aware, after hearing all of this evidence, the closing arguments, and all of these days of witness statements, the judge had determined that there was sufficient evidence for David Anthony Burke to be tried on all counts of murder in relation to Celeste Rivas Hernandez. So this means that he is being tried on all charges and not just the murder charges, and death penalty is still on the table. Now, David will be arraigned on August 31st, so the end of August, and that DAs Nathan and Beth state that this is only a fraction of the evidence they have against David. All they had to do on this day was show probable cause. They say that the evidence in trial will overwhelmingly prove without a reasonable doubt that David Anthony Burke committed these crimes. Now, as I said previously, David will be arraigned on August 31st. Now, what happens at an arraignment, you're probably asking. So at an arraignment, the case moves to a higher court officially. So it's no longer just in the court that it's in now. It officially goes to a higher court, almost like a Supreme Court. David's charges are officially confirmed and read back to him, and David and his attorney may enter a final plea. The trial will be within 90 days of his arraignment, according to the judge. So, what does all of this mean? This means that David Anthony Burke is officially going to be tried and most likely convicted for the murder of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Thank you again to Mads for putting all of this information together, and I'll be sure to keep you guys updated. Rest in peace to Celeste, and I really hope that her and her family get the justice that she deserves. Thank you.